We're 3 weeks into the fantasy football season. Are there some players that you're just too stubborn about? You're not willing to drop them. And what about in life? Are we too stubborn to make the changes that we need to? Let's unpack it. This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast where we unpack fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson with Trent Smith. We're your fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while you play fantasy football with purpose. As we provide fantasy advice, we won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing. We're coming to you live here at 2:45-ish from the Unpacking and Ministry studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we have got a full show because week 3, oh boy, we learned a lot in week 3. Finished it up with a doubleheader on Monday Night Football. How great was that? I love it. I heard Colin Cowherd earlier say he doesn't like doubleheaders on Monday Night Football. You're crazy, man. I love them. You kidding me? I had 2 TVs rolling. I came in late, so I was able to record, skip through commercials. Then I was watching both. I was timing it out. I had a wonderful, wonderful evening watching both games. So, but man, how about those Bills? So we've got a lot to talk about with them. Plenty of fantasy shenanigans to get into. We will do our accountability and confession. We did get a couple things wrong, but a lot of things right that we got to talk about as well. And then we're going to play a little game called Would You Rather today. We'll do Peace or Panic. We'll ask, who is that? There was an offensive lineman that scored last night. How about that? So we'll talk waiver wire, bandwagon riding, and have a ton of fun today. Be sure to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. And if you aren't a member yet, it's not too late. Become a member anytime. We provide weekly breakouts where we take fantasy concepts, relate them to the Bible, relate them to life, and you can read those on our website, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. And then the hope is you'll discuss them with your league. And so it's already been a fun few weeks to this point in the season. And we hope that you will enjoy today's topic as we talk about being stubborn in fantasy and life. And so we'll do that in just a moment. But first, we got to say hello to Trip, and we begin the show with a little fantasy shenanigans.
Fantasy shenanigans.
All right. You see my Panthers hat on right now. The biggest fantasy shenanigans of the weekend was the fact that the Carolina Panthers came to life. I talked about it on the Unpacking It podcast today, but Andy Dalton was the spark the Panthers needed. Deontay Johnson, Chuba Hubbard, even Adam Thielen, who's now injured. But man, the Panthers looked much better. I got to start there. Trip, where do you begin today?
I had a great time watching that game, and I saw your Panther swag today. And remember last week we talked about the fact that you had a family engagement. Did you get to watch? Were you actually able to watch the game in real time, or were you getting the updates on your phone, or what happened there, man?
It was a challenge to say the least, but I thankfully with today's technology, the phone, the red zone, I was all set. And here's the greatest thing. So I love being a girl dad. And my daughters are awesome. They'll try to watch a little sports with me and stuff. But I also have a nephew who's 9, almost 10, and he is a diehard sports fan.
Nice.
And he was at this family get-together. And so he's locked into the game. And so now I have an excuse. Hey, I'm hanging out with my nephew, and it's a real treat for me. So I was able to get the game in. So
it was a fun game to watch as a Panthers fan, and we don't get too many of those. But Andy Dalton looked like the real deal. You know, my boys, it's a weird series of circumstances that led to this, but they are Bengals fans. They like the Bengals. They like the Bengals uniforms, and they're big fans of Paw Patrol. Chase is their favorite pup on Paw Patrol, and so they have conflated Jamar Chase and Chase from Paw Patrol, and so they know Chase plays for the Bengals, and they like to watch him. And man, that was a wild game to watch last night. I did not think the Commanders had a chance. I did not think that game would be close. And that was the coming out party for Jaden Daniels.
So from a fantasy standpoint, the Bengals were still pretty good overall.
Right. Yeah.
Burrow helped me win a week. Jamar Chase was unbelievable. What I was encouraged by is the fact that T. Higgins was out there and he was targeted.
Yeah, he looks pretty good.
He did not have good production, but he was involved.
He had 2 catches where they were long passes and 1 foot went down out of bounds. He would have had 45 more yards or something like that. And then it would have been a middling. One of them was in the end zone too, I think. So it could have been a totally different night for him. I think he's a buy low candidate, if you ask me.
Yes, people are frustrated with him, I'm sure, through 3 weeks. But yeah, the talent's still there. They need him. They need him to be involved. We'll talk about that third wide receiver in that offense as well, and the running backs. We'll talk about those later today. But it was nice to see Terry McLaurin get into the end zone. We've been waiting on him. I know I have. I started him last night. That was nice. So good day for him. I also started Zach Ertz. He was involved, and he's been a top 10-ish tight end so far this year. I was all excited about Ben Sinnott, but he hasn't gotten involved yet. So Zach Ertz is the guy, at least for now. Nice little dump off guy for Jaden Daniels, reliable on third down. So there's some fantasy relevance for Zach Ertz. But some other shenanigans from the weekend. We've got to talk about Juwan Jennings, the wide receiver of the week, 46.5 points. And Deebo Samuel out. You'd expect Brandon Ayuk to have this big game. I was trying to trade for Brandon Ayuk, and all along, I should have just targeted Juwan Jennings on the waiver wire. What a performance from him.
I have him on 3 or 4 teams, and he was on the bench. He was on my bench in all of those leagues. I didn't put him in. I put Calvin Ridley in instead of Juwan Jennings in at least one league, and that one hurt, But as long as Deebo Samuel and George Kittle are hurt, he's going to be relevant. Yeah, so as long as those 2 guys aren't on the field, and that's been true in previous years. Ayuk, there's something weird going on there, man. He doesn't look right. I guess he missed too much practice, and now he's taking these first few weeks to get back into game shape. And Juwan is the guy to go with there apparently in San Francisco.
So one of my key philosophies, and I try to stick to this, is that I avoid the players when I'm drafting that are dealing with contract issues. So this year, I avoided Brandon Ayuk. I avoided CeeDee Lamb, and I did avoid Jamar Chase. Now, Chase is really the only one of those 3 that we've seen, okay, he's playing at the level that we're used to seeing him play. CeeDee Lamb, what are we doing? All the other wide receivers in Dallas are playing great. Jalen Tolbert got in on the action this past week. Dak is still putting up huge numbers for Dallas. They lost again. The running game is almost non-existent. Your boy Rico did okay, but Zeke's not doing much. Ferguson was solid, but CeeDee Lamb, he's like 20th wide receiver right now. It's not good enough.
If you watch the Bengals last week and when Jamar Chase was kind of being excluded from the offensive game plan for a couple of quarters, he got angry. He went full diva mode. He said, give me the ball. And they were hyper targeting him last night. When CD has a quarter or 2 like that, where he's kind of out of the game plan, he seems to get despondent and kind of quiet on the sideline. I want him to get angry and say, you should be passing the ball to me a dozen times a game, giving me the Malik Neighbors treatment, because he's the clear. He is the stud on that offense. It's not even close. And he needs to be getting the ball more. He's another guy I might try to buy low on because I'm not too worried about him.
Because even though I'm concerned about the Cowboys overall,
worried about that team, not worried about CD.
Like I said, Dak's throwing the ball all over the field. So there is that. Plus, they were down in that game. So that was part of it as well. A couple other shenanigans. Malik Willis, again. He scored 25 points. Like, he was a fantasy relevant quarterback. Not only did they squeak out a win, no. They convincingly won. And Malik Willis was awesome. Jaden Reed, fantastic. Even Christian Watson got involved again. So that was impressive. I'm all in on the Packers, I have to say. I really am. I'm going to talk about a running back in a little bit, but very impressive for them. One other shenanigans, just as more of a reminder to our listeners, bye weeks are coming up week 5. So let's think ahead. I was concerned about this because for the most part, I try to go one quarterback in a lot of leagues, especially with short benches. But Jared Goff and the Lions have week 5 as a bye. Prepare accordingly. You got to get ahead of the game. So anyway, that's just a friendly reminder. A couple other things. The concussions are always concerning. I'm watching the Eagles game. I was pretty into the Eagles-Saints game. It was an ugly game. It was a tight game. I wanted to see, all right, are the Saints really for real? The Saints were bad. The Eagles were bad. However, Dallas Goedert was awesome. But part of that was Devontae Smith went down. He got crushed. I'm loving life. I got Devontae Smith in a couple leagues. They're delivering the ball. Let's go. Crushed. And he goes out of the game. Then last night, Austin Eckler, big touchdown, playing well. He gets crushed. He gets a concussion. Now he's out. So the concussions are always concerning just from the mental injury. You don't want to talk about messing with the brain. but then it also leads to so many question marks the following week. So now we're wondering as fantasy managers, will these two guys especially be healthy? And then, of course, you got Tua. We're still wondering about the future for him. We'll talk about peace or panic later with the Dolphins. So I think we know which side we need to be on that. But anyway, any other shenanigans you want to bring up here at the top of the show?
I mean, maybe we saved it. Yeah, we saved this for peace or panic as well. But just the tight end wasteland that we seem to be living in this season. I mean, the one for me that was so wild when I heard this stat is that Mark Andrews only ran 4 routes in the game this weekend. And it's not, so that's not 4 targets that he got. That's 4 routes that he was running. And before the season started, we were saying, hey, you want one of those premier tight ends. You want one of those top tight ends, and none of those guys are coming through. And I'm having a hard time figuring out who is it just a fluky thing and who am I really worried about? But I think I'm starting to get a little worried about Mark Andrews. So.
The Ravens are, they're going to lean on the run. And so there will be some games where that works and they're winning and they just roll with it. And then there will be the games, though. They got some tough matchups along the way. I mean, this is the AFC North is still going to be tough, that they will have to rely on Mark Andrews. But as far as what weeks that's going to be the case, it's going to be tricky. So we'll do a little would you rather later, asking, would you rather have Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce? So stick around for
is there a third option?
That's right. For that conversation. So, all right, we're going to jump into today's breakout topic, and we are talking stubbornness. And if I'm honest, I can be very stubborn in fantasy, because here's what happens. Throughout the summer, we're preparing for fantasy drafts. We're looking at all the players, and there are certain players that we buy into. We draft them. We believe in them. There's a reason that we get behind and excited about what is in store for their season. But then what happens? We're 3 weeks in, and we're starting to realize, maybe they're a little banged up. Maybe they're not involved in the offense like we thought they would. Maybe they're just not as good as we anticipated. The opportunities, aren't there. Maybe their team just isn't as good. The quarterback play isn't as good. And so now we have a choice. Do we continue to hang on to these players, or are we willing to make the necessary changes and drop some of these players? And so who is that player for you that you're so excited about and you're pretty stubborn? You're like, I do not want to drop this guy. I want to hang on to this player. And the question is, are you being stubborn? Or in some cases, you may be wise, right? There are certain players that I think we have to continue to be patient with, and we should not give up on them. And they talk about T. Higgins. Like, that's let's not give up on him just yet. But we know, we look at our roster, and there are certain players where we're just kind of being foolish at this point. We're blind. We're being stubborn. And so who is that player for you? Trip, any players come to mind right off the bat? Who have you been stubborn and you're kind of determining, all right, should I drop him or not?
This is a huge problem for me in fantasy, because I sort of stake my flag on one of these guys. I set a hard opinion, and then I continue to believe for way too long. And so, I mean, we've talked ad nauseum together over the course of a few episodes about the Jaguars and how they might just be a bad team. I got to get out on Trevor Lawrence. I have him on a lot of teams. I got to pivot. I got to figure out, I can't be stubborn about that anymore. There's a part of me that's like, I think he's a good quarterback, but I can't figure out what's going on there. Another hard one for me, this is a hard one for me, is I love Michael Pittman. I came into this season as an Anthony Richardson believer. And I think it's time for me to repent. I just, we'll talk about this a little bit more with the panic, but I'm stubborn on those two guys, and I wanted that to be a great sort of QB receiver combo this year. I'm more and more pessimistic that is going to be the case. And so, yeah, but in general, this is a huge problem for me. I come in with my opinions every season, and knowing when to let go is really, really hard.
Absolutely. And one of the players for me that you made as a listener, hey, Bryce, I've been listening to you since the summer, and you keep talking about this guy named Kamani Vidal. And for 3 weeks, he has been inactive. Bryce, you're being stubborn. It's time to drop him. Guess what? I'm not going to. I'm too stubborn. I'm hanging on to him. I'm hanging on to him in all my leagues, because guess what? Gus Edwards is not playing well. But there's an example. But here's where I will admit where I am being stubborn and I need to change. I was totally out on the Minnesota Vikings, And so like I haven't picked up any players from the Vikings. I have no Vikings players on any of my rosters. And maybe I'm being a little stubborn about that. But I just like I can't buy into Sam Darnold. But there are some quarterback situations in some of my leagues, especially with Jared Goff, that I may need to get a guy like Sam Darnold. And so I need to overcome sort of that negativity toward him. And then also I've been real stubborn about Chase Brown, the Bengals running back. And I watched him last night and I still see it. Like I still think he's really good. But the reality is Zach Moss is the guy there. He's averaging 16 points per game. Chase Brown is only averaging 6. So it's clearly Zach Moss's backfield, and Chase is sort of the change of pace guy. So I keep waiting for him to be the starter, the guy. And I think I'm being stubborn about that. So I need where I need to loosen up is not put him in my starting lineup. I think that's the key in that situation. So who are those players for you? Who is it time to let go of, move on from, admit that you were wrong? Because the longer we play fantasy football, it becomes clear there are certain players where we need to stand firm on. And, hey, we believe in these guys, we stick with them. But we also have to realize the importance of being flexible and being ready to make the necessary adjustments instead of being stubborn. And so you have to challenge yourself and again, be willing to admit that you're wrong. And the reality is it's hard for us to admit we're wrong in fantasy and in life. And so, pride is really at the core of both. Because, hey, listen, when I'm at the draft and I tell my guys, people in my league, when I draft someone, I go, look out for this guy. You guys don't know who he is, but you just wait till week 4. This guy's going to be awesome. Well, now I'm prideful and stubborn that I got to hang on to that guy. I can't drop him because I put myself out there. And so in fantasy and in life, we have to say, okay, well, where's the pride here? And go a little bit deeper and identify and go, ooh, I'm making decisions and I'm being stubborn because of my pride. And then also when it comes to life, in what areas are we resistant to change, where we just refuse to change our mind? And again, there are reasons and areas of life where we cling to truth and we're steadfast in what we believe. Absolutely. But we also know there are certain things that we are hanging on to, past beliefs, past attitudes, past perspectives that are wrong, that we're being foolish, we're being stubborn, we're being prideful. And God is trying to free us up from those things. And in humility, we've got to let go of those things. And so where in your life are you being stubborn? Where are the things that continue to bubble up? From a fantasy standpoint, you're listening to fantasy, podcasts or TV shows, and you continue to hear the critics talk about certain players. Hey, drop this guy. Time to move on. This guy's not going to work out. You're watching the game. It's time to move on. And you just refuse to do it. What areas of your life is your wife, your friends, your parents saying, hey, stop. This is not working well for you. And you're digging your feet in the ground and you're being stubborn and you're unwilling to change. And in what ways is that holding you back? Because what happens in fantasy, once you drop that guy, it opens you up to get somebody new and you get an opportunity for new production. And so in life, when we let go of some of those things that are holding us back, then we can experience really Jesus taking over, Jesus stepping in, and we experience the fruit of life with him and giving, more and more of our life over to him, surrendering more and more and more to him. So this is a great topic. It's very convicting to me. Trip, I'll let you jump in. When you think about stubbornness and pride, what are some things that come to mind?
Me too. Highly convicting for me. This is not just true in my fantasy life. This is true in all of my life, in my spiritual life. I mean, I think that pride clearly is the center of the bullseye with this issue, but pride on the outside is often symptomatic of insecurity and shame on the inside. Those things are not mutually exclusive. They're two sides of the same coin. And so on the outside, I bow up and I say, I'm right. I know best. I see myself the most clearly. And on the inside, I'm riddled with these fears of like, if someone really saw me for who I am, they would reject me. They would be disgusted by me. And so for me, you said this really well, Bryce. One of the keys to not being stubborn and to changing when change is necessary is, do you have people in your life who can speak the truth to you, even when it hurts a little bit, even when it's convicting? But if you find yourself full of shame and insecurity, when somebody like a spouse or a close friend tries to speak directly to you like that, take a step back and start with Jesus. Jesus, who always tells you the truth, but who speaks the truth in love. You can sit down with him in prayer and say, show me myself more clearly. Show me what's going on in my heart. And he will tell you the truth through his word, but he always does it with mercy. He never does it with shaming you. And so oftentimes when I find, especially my wife is good at telling me when I need to stop being stubborn and make a change. But oftentimes when I reject that and I get angry or insecure at her, it's because I haven't been close with Jesus and confessing my sin and going to him for confession before I go to other people for correction, if that makes sense.
That's good. That's good. Here's what it says in Proverbs 29:1 Amplified Version. It says, he who hardens his neck and refuses instruction after being often reproved, corrected, criticized, will suddenly be broken beyond repair. And so stubbornness leads to pain and foolishness. It's foolish, and you end up getting broken. And so how do we avoid that? Well, we got to make changes. And to your point, we go to Jesus and say, all right, Lord, what areas do I need to change? How do I do it? Walk me through this. Show me in your word how I do this. And give me the strength that I need to step forward with these changes. Change me from the inside out, and humble me to be able to be willing to do that. And so the other important verse, a couple verses found in Ephesians 4:22 through 24, when we think about moving on from our previous way of thinking and our former life of sin and selfishness and stubbornness and pride, as we follow Jesus, we're stepping into a new life, a new journey, and this ongoing transformation. But what it says in Ephesians, it says to throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. So that's who we're becoming. But in order for that to happen, we got to get rid of all this old stuff, and we got to ask God, take it, get rid of it. Let me put on this new nature and yield to the Spirit and walk by the Spirit and allow God to take over again all areas of our lives. And so this requires surrender and submission and going a different direction, admitting we're wrong and admitting, I don't want to think that way. I don't want to act that way. That's my former way of life. I'm leaving that behind. I'm not going to hang on to that and be stubborn and say, I'm not changing. No, we're always, as Jesus followers, we're always changing. We're always trying to become more and more like Jesus and allowing him to work in us. So any thoughts on that, Trip?
Yeah, I mean, God, his plan for you is to not turn you into like a boring and sort of flat person. He doesn't. Holiness doesn't mean boringness, and he wants to transform you into a new and righteous and holy and joyful and radiant and adventurous way of life. And he does that little by little. I think the two mistakes that I make the most often when it comes to being stubborn and being resistant to the change that God is trying to bring about in my life, one of them is to be pessimistic and to say, I can never really change. The place that God wants to take me, it's too hard. I can't do it. And he says, hey, one step at a time, one small step at a time. The other one is to think, okay, if I make this commitment to not being stubborn and to changing, that tomorrow I have to have it all figured out, that I've got to be this new and sort of perfect person a week from now, or it has been a failure. And he said, hey, no, I love you, son. This is a lifelong project. I'm leading you one step at a time. And it's so sweet to get to see him do that in your life when you stop resisting the change and make those little steps of faithfulness each day.
I love it. So the question today, do we make the necessary changes in fantasy or in life, or do we just keep the roster the same and we're stubborn and prideful and go, no, I'm not making any changes. Nope, forget it. And so are we going to be honest with ourselves and more importantly, honest with God and allowing the truth of God's word to, reveal what in us needs to change and allow, the Holy Spirit to really move in us. And so let's decide to drop the necessary players in fantasy that are dragging us down. And then in life, getting out of the way and letting go of anything that's holding us back and allow Jesus to take over. And we could pray Psalm 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. And so let's ask God to change us. That's the encouragement for us today. So as we think fantasy wise, any other players that you've actually changed your mind on and have been willing to drop. I know for me, 3 guys that I am right there on the cusp of saying, you know what, I think it's time to move on. Zamir White, Trey Benson, and Blake Corum. So those are 3 guys for me. So those of you listening, you can leave your comments. All right, who you been stubborn? Who you been stubborn about in fantasy? Who you thinking about letting go this week? We'll talk about who you can add and replace those guys with later in the show when we talk waiver wire. But that is this week's breakout. Again, you can check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. You can read more about this topic. We've got a bunch of different questions for you to consider and also discuss with your league as well. So check that out, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. All right, here on the show, we like to hold ourselves accountable to what we say. We like to be, we like to confess when we miss, when we talk about certain players and the expectations that we have for certain guys. And sometimes that means we get to say, hey, we were right. So we'll have a little fun with that as well. But to help us get going, we got a little sounder for you. So here we go.
Listen, I'm running this show, and you got to take my advice. I know what I'm doing.
You blew it!
How could you have such horrible instincts and survive this long?
What is wrong with you?
Let this be a reminder to you all that this organization will not tolerate failure.
There it is. All right, so we got a little accountability and confession. All right, we'll start on the positive. How about that? Panthers, baby. Deontay Johnson. I told you guys this was one of my pounding the table players during the summer, and I'm so glad that we saw the player that he is. And I will say this again. I can't believe the national media was so hard on the Panthers receivers and weapons. I don't understand. Oh, the Panthers have no one to throw to. Bruce Young has no one to throw to. What are you talking about? Deontay Johnson's been a great receiver. And so we saw that from a fantasy perspective on Sunday. And now with Adam Thielen going down, the opportunities are going to be there for Deontay. So that was awesome. Also, I have admitted that I am out on Josh Jacobs, the running back for the Packers. That means I'm in on the backups. And this was the 3rd string running back for a time, Emmanuel Wilson. Oh boy, we saw it. 50 receiving yards, 35. Let's see, he had 2 targets, 2 receiving touchdowns. So he had a wonderful game. And so I think he's the guy you want in Green Bay. Go pick him up off of waivers. But those are the 2 guys I'm most excited about moving forward. So fired up about that. Here's where I've been wrong, though. I totally avoided Rashee Rice. And I am paying dearly for that because what a value he was. Now, I'm okay with it because I don't like guys that get in trouble in the offseason. It's another group of players that I just avoid during drafts. But I have to admit and confess that I do not have Rice on any teams, and I am missing out on those points, and I played against him this week, and it cost me dearly. Also, I mentioned Blake Corum earlier. I was in on him, so that meant I was out on Kyron Williams. What a game he had on Sunday. 3 touchdowns. He's averaging 23 points per game. I did see something earlier that maybe he's a sell high candidate, and I'd probably consider that too because I'm not sure how much you can trust the Rams moving forward. It's just a little crazy there with the Rams. I don't know how they won that game either. I mean, that was an impressive comeback win. I think it speaks more to how concerning we should be or how concerned we should be about the 49ers. But anyway, those are a few things I'd like to confess today. Tripp, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing in the NFL is how important it is to have a great coach, and that Rams victory, what the Vikings are doing, what the Steelers have been able to do, just figuring out the game plan that they need to win on any given week is absolutely astonishing. And so, yeah, I do think, I mean, the Rams, I think you can continue to start some of these backup guys and throw them in there. And Kyron Williams is going to be the big portion of their offense. And so he's a guy that you can start with confidence, and he's just a fun player to watch. I mean, I think this is the time where I have to check in with my weekly Cardinals believer sort of confession / counseling session. I cannot figure that team out. I think that the offense is good. And I think that week 1 and week 3, they played really great first halves. And then it's like they came out in the second half. And I don't know if they were taking a nap in the locker room or ate a big piece of cake. I mean, they
Kyler's
just look
playing
lethargic.
Video games.
Yeah, maybe he's going in there and playing Call of Duty during
with
halftime.
Aaron, our producer.
I don't know what is going on with that team. I think that I still believe that offense is dynamic. But now, it just seems like Marvin Harrison's the only thing they got going. Trey McBride is he's injured, but even before that, you called this during the offseason. You were not a McBride believer, and it just seems like, at least so far, he hasn't lived up to the preseason hype and the expectations that we had for him. I don't know what to think about the Cardinals. I am really, really excited about Malik Neighbors, and he,
what a game.
He is a true alpha in the NFL. And I think that I believe that coming into the season. I was worried about the Daniel Jones effect, but he is just so good that if he just gets apparently 60% of the targets that Daniel Jones has to distribute are going to Malik Neighbors. I mean, he is so good, such a stud, and a lot of fun to watch. So there's a little victory that I was a believer coming in. But
so all right, so I'll give you the Neighbors. He had a big game. He's looked great so far this season. But let's fast forward to week 14, 15, 16. We're talking fantasy playoffs. Are we counting on the Giants and Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors in the cold weather in New York? That's tough for me. So I think he's a sell high for sure.
Maybe so. Yeah. They got a couple of games here. Dallas defense isn't much to fear anymore, apparently. But they're a little bit easier to run on. And then Seattle has actually proven to be a pretty solid defense. So these next couple of weeks will be telling for how Neighbors is going to be used. Man, I would be so scared if I sold high that he might just be the real deal and could be one of these top 10 receiver guys for years to come. So
yeah, I mean, if you're in a keeper league, you definitely don't want to get rid of him. But in a redraft, yeah, at some point, I don't know. I just don't think you could count on him down the stretch. The Giants, I mean, they beat the Browns, but like the Browns and the Giants will be fighting for that number 1 pick this year. So that was what that game was. I think it really was. All right, last thing I'll confess today. All right, the Atlanta Falcons. The offensive line is very concerning for Bijan Robinson because the holes aren't there. I mean, watching that game Sunday night and seeing 2 offensive linemen go down. I mean, Bijan's great, so I don't question. Hey, I took him two overall. He was my number 1 running back coming in this year. I stand by it. But when the O-line isn't good, it's concerning. So they're going to have to adjust their offense. And I would love for Kirk Cousins to throw the ball to Bijan. Just dump it off. Get him out in space. Mix it up a little bit, Falcons. Let's go. So I'm not totally writing him off, but he has been a letdown. He's still averaging like 15 to 18 points per game, depending on your league. So he's right around that, running back 15. But we drafted him to be the number 1 guy. So it's a letdown. There's no question about it. So I will acknowledge that.
You were a Bijan believer coming into the season. I was
time.
a Kyle Pitts believer coming into the season. I think that both of those guys are buy low candidates. They have played 3 really good defenses to start the season off, and they have a stretch of less concerning defenses coming up. They really don't play another what I would call like a top tier defense until week 11. And so I think Bijan is going to be better. It still seems like that offense is kind of getting sort of corroborated. They're it's not clicking yet. And Kyle Pitts, man, he had a pass interference in the end zone that was an egregious pass interference where he was targeted for a touchdown. And the play where Kirk Cousins was intercepted, the ball got tipped and intercepted. Pitts was running free down the sideline. And so if those 2 plays are just a little bit different, then Pitts is you're looking at him as like a top tier tight end. So especially Bijan, but I think I'm also buying low on Pitts. If I could acquire either of those players, I'd be willing to do it.
All right, there it is. One little more pat on the back, but also criticizing myself. So I've been out on the Saints, but then this week I lost my mind and I decided to start Derek Carr against the Eagles and bench Jaden Daniels. I mean, thankfully I still won, but that was so silly. But here's the thing. But I've been out on the Saints, and so I told you guys, Rashid Shaheed. I go, don't buy the hype. He was 0 receptions on 5 targets. So he's boomer bust kind of guy. He's not a guy you can trust in your lineup. Maybe as a flex guy during bye weeks, fine. But the idea that he was all of a sudden going to emerge as this top tier wide receiver, I don't think you can trust him fully. But Chris Olave, he's solid. He's the guy that, in that offense is going to be the one that is most consistent, I believe, moving forward. All right, let's play a little Piece or Panic. And if you've got players, if you're listening now, who are you maybe panicking about? Have either he's gotten off to a slow start, he had a down week 3. Let's talk about the Lions a little bit. All right, so they're fine, they're playing well, but Sam Laporta, He's got an ankle injury. He's only averaging 6.6 fantasy points per game. Many people, he was their fantasy tight end one. I think he was mine going into the season. I drafted him in one league. So he's gotten off to a very slow start. And, the Lions haven't been clicking to the level that we know they're capable of yet. Jahmyr Gibbs has been solid, but not elite. Montgomery's been fine.
Amon-Ra.
Thank you. St. Brown has gotten better the last couple of weeks. But Sam Laporta, there is still peace, though, because the tight end position still is wide open, and I'm not panicking just yet. The injury may lead me to bench him for a week or two, and that's fine, but I'm not giving up on him. I'm not trading him because I want him at the end of the season because I still believe in Sam Laporta.
Yeah, I think the rise of Jameson Williams has hurt Laporta a little bit, and as long as Jahmyr Gibbs is healthy, he's going to catch a few passes per game. I think I'm slightly worried there. As long as all of those guys stay healthy and don't get suspended for gambling or something, hypothetical like that, I think maybe just Laporta's upside is a little bit more limited than it was last season. My panic player that I believed in coming into the season was Anthony Richardson. I'm so worried about Anthony Richardson and every pass catcher. I made the joke, I don't know if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, that he can throw the ball 80 yards down the field, and anyone within 80 yards, he's prone to overthrowing. It's not really a joke. I mean, that's sort of what is happening. He uncorks these passes that are so beautiful. And you're like, this guy, he has a cannon attached to his shoulder. And then he has a dude wide open 7 yards in front of him, and he throws it 10 yards over their head, So it's, and the problem is he's not running, he's not running because Jonathan Taylor is healthy and looks really good. And so Richardson is a guy that I had in a couple leagues that I am in full panic mode there. And that also means that I'm panicking about Michael Pittman, who I have on one team as well. Until Richardson figures it out, Pittman, I think, is unstartable. So full panic there for me and the Indianapolis Colts pass catchers.
Yeah, I think it's fair, and not to pile on, but I just didn't understand all the hype for Richardson in the offseason. I mean, he was just being drafted so early. Like, everyone was drafting him at his ceiling, and he's coming off a big injury, and he barely played last year.
He's a guy who, when he throws the ball 75 yards down the field, it looks like Aaron Rodgers threw the ball. And when he runs over a defender right in front of him on a running play, it looks like Derrick Henry running the ball. But all of the normal plays that fall in between those sort of outlier superlative plays, he just doesn't do the normal sort of run-of-the-mill stuff well. And it turns out you have to do that to play football. He's completing fewer than 50% of his passes so far this season. And that is worrisome. And he's only played 5 full games in the NFL. So for all intents and purposes, he's still kind of a rookie. It's just a question of whether he's ever going to develop into just a mediocre passer.
Well, yeah, and we've got to be patient with him from an NFL standpoint, but from a fantasy standpoint, yeah, I mean, we're panicking. No question.
You're right. I'm moving on. I got to move on. I got to find another option. I got to offload Pittman if I can. I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know who wants Pittman at this point. I mean, you can't really,
it's too late.
You can't cut him, but man, you got to bench Pittman. You can't put him out there yet. All right. Peace or panic, Miami Dolphins. I mean, it is full-blown panic. I don't even think we can't even throw the word peace out there unless they somehow trade for a quarterback. But they do not have a quarterback.
They will trade for a quarterback.
They have to.
Yeah, they will. Maybe they give Tim Boyle a shot this week. Well,
come on. What are we doing here?
I heard somebody say on another podcast that he is the best third-string quarterback in the NFL. So that's maybe not the superlative that you want, but they're going to give him a shot. It's not going to go well. Listen to me. Within 2 weeks, they will have another quarterback on that team. I kind of think it'll be Ryan Tannehill. I don't know who it'll be.
Full circle, Ryan Tannehill.
They have to figure it out. And until then, you can't play their wide receivers. This is a team that has playoff aspirations. They got to get another quarterback on that team, and I think that they will. It could be a little bit of the Andy Dalton effect, right? Where maybe you can go buy one of these receivers low, with the understanding that they'll have a competent quarterback throwing to them in 2 weeks, but it's possible they just roll with what they have. That to me would indicate that they're packing it in this season. And I don't know how you do that with a 30-year-old Tyreek Hill. You've got this guy for a couple more years. I think as long as he's on your team, you got to figure out somebody who can pass the ball to him more than 10 yards down the field.
So are you saying your bench? I don't have Tyreek Hill. Would you actually bench Tyreek Hill? I mean, I don't know how you do it. Like in fantasy, there's certain guys where you just like, you start them no matter what, but the expectation has to be really low. I mean, I have Devon Achane. I will still put him in there probably now as my flex guy, but yeah, the expectations are really low. This is a bad offense.
They play Tennessee this week.
Which is all right. So we'll give them this week.
I think I probably play them. They play New England next week, which is a solid defense that wants to slow the game down.
Oh, yeah.
If it's still, Skylar Thompson or Tim Boyle throwing the ball by week 5, I think I would bench Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle is an easy bench. You have to bench him until you know. So
yeah.
But man, Tyreek is one of you might have drafted Tyreek second overall this season, and that you're in a tough spot there if Tyreek is your wide receiver 1.
This is a side note. We don't have time to even talk about this, but how foolish are the Miami Dolphins to not have a legitimate backup quarterback when Tua has the injury history that he does? You have to invest in that position. I mean, you almost say, all right, we don't even need a number 2. Like, you almost don't need Waddle. If you've got Tyreek Hill, like, you could probably replace Waddle. Like, all right, we got to spend money other places. Like, you got to figure something out. I just don't understand this. Anyway, that's a side note. So there you go. There's a piece or panic. All right, I want to debut a new segment today. We call it Would You Rather? And we're going to consider a couple different situations and a couple of different players. Would you rather have them on your team or not? Here we go.
Get in on this. Would you rather?
That sounds good. I'll have that.
It's a good time. You know what I mean? This is Would You Rather.
I'm psyched.
All right, I'm psyched too. So, all right, would you rather pick up Cordero Patterson if he's on waivers, and I guess you could say start him? He's averaging 8.3 yards per attempt. Najee Harris is banged up, should play. Jalen Warren banged up, not sure his status. Or Jaleel McLaughlin in Denver. Everybody's kind of fading Javonte Williams. He's been struggling. But Jaleel McLaughlin, he got into the end zone, but he's only averaging 1.4 yards per carry. So these are deep running backs for teams that are desperate. We're dealing with a lot of injuries across the league. Would you rather? Where do you land?
If it's a PPR league, the answer is Jaleel McLaughlin pretty clearly to me. I know that Cordero Patterson can catch the ball. That just isn't what he has done lately. And Jaleel McLaughlin, I think at the beginning, the first game of the season, he caught a bunch of passes. It didn't turn into a bunch of yards, but if you're PPR, even half PPR, I think I'm going Jaleel McLaughlin there. Otherwise, if you need a guy you can start this week, I'm almost certain Jalen Warren is not playing this week. And I think I put Cordero Patterson in there. A name to remember longer term is Audric Estime, who's the rookie running back for the Denver Broncos, who's on IR right now. So he's still got 2 more weeks on IR, but their running game is a disaster. And Javonte Williams looks cooked, man. I mean, put a fork in that guy. And so Estime, don't go pick him out. Don't go pick him up necessarily this week. I don't think you have to, but just pay attention to him.
Put him on your IR spot.
Maybe if you have an IR spot and can add him in and stick him in the IR spot, that would be a great move. But I think that he'll be the starting running back for Denver by week 8. And I think so.
All right. I have learned from my past mistakes to doubt Cordero Patterson after what he did with Arthur Smith in Atlanta. Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh as the offensive coordinator. Patterson's probably got a game or 2 where he lights it up. I'm not going to write that off. And the Steelers are for real. When you've got a defense like that, they need to run the ball, and they're going to keep trying to get that going because it hasn't been to the level that I think they need it to be and expect it to be. And maybe Patterson gives them a little spark. So with some more carries. All right, here's another would you rather. Would you rather own Carson Steele or Samaje Perine? Both in the Kansas City Chiefs backfield. We saw the first game without Isaiah Pacheco Sunday night against Atlanta. And guess what? They both averaged 4.2 yards per carry. I've been a Perine guy. I've got Samaje Perine. I actually have Steele in one league, Perine in another. But if you had to choose between the two moving forward for the next few weeks, who do you trust more?
I watched that game in its entirety, and Perine looked like the better runner to me. That said, I think the right answer is objectively Carson Steele. He got 17 carries. Now, I did hear, and this is a funny little story, but I did hear that it was his sister's wedding on Sunday, and they had a watch party to watch the game. And so maybe just because he's a guy who works so hard in training camp, they're like, let's give Steele some carries, let him have a good time on his sister's wedding that he's missing here. But I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
The Chiefs are toying with the league, by the way.
They just do whatever they want. Yeah, they're just having fun behind the back passes. It doesn't matter. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think, is coming back in a couple of weeks, and then it's just going to be a full-on timeshare there. And I think none of those guys are you going to feel confident starting while Pacheco is gone.
All right, last one. Would you rather have Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce the rest of the way? The rest of the way. My pastor Ray just called me earlier today, and he was asking me, hey, what do you think of Travis Kelce? And here was my take. I think Kelce will have some good games, but I think it's over where we're seeing greatness every single week. I just don't think that that's who Kelce is anymore, because we saw it last year. So I think we've seen enough of a sample size where if they really need him in a big game, he will produce. But the idea that he's a top 5 tight end week in, week out, let alone number one, I don't think is realistic. So now, where do you go at the tight end spot? I mean, it's so up in the air. It's so up and down all season long. It's a roller coaster ride. Dallas Goedert, he's right up there as the top tight end so far. So him and Cole Kmet had a big week last week. So man, it's pretty wild. But between these two, would you rather? Who'd you have?
What you're exactly right. That what we're seeing is the continuation of what happened in the second half of the season last year with Kelce. And the Chiefs are only playing for one thing, and that is a Super Bowl. And they're not going to wear Kelce down in the regular season. They don't have to. They're 3-0. But Mark Andrews ran 4 routes this past week. The Ravens offensive line is bad. And so both of those tight ends are being asked to block. And so with these two guys specifically, I still think that Kelce is the better bet to catch a touchdown right now. So if I got to choose between these two, I want to go Kelce. But if I have either one of them, I might be trying to trade on the name value for one of those middle tier tight ends. I mean, if I could turn, Travis Kelce around I wouldn't trade him for Cole Kmet, but if I could turn him around for Kyle Pitts or like a concussed Trey McBride, I would do that in a heartbeat. And in some leagues you might be able to.
All right. Who would I rather have? Neither. I want neither of these guys. That's
I didn't know that was
answer.
an option. Trick question.
That's my answer. I think I would go Mark Andrews, because I still think in that passing game, he's so important. So there will be weeks where they have to pass the ball and Mark Andrews has to be involved. So
that's a tough one.
Yeah. All right. Let's do a little bit of bandwagon riding. Gosh, this show is flying by. We'll do a couple players, whether we're going to jump on or off the bandwagon. Here we go.
Get off the bandwagon.
It's time for bandwagon riding. Getting on, getting off. Make up your mind, all right?
All right, here we go. Panthers, bandwagon riding. Andy Dalton, are you jumping on or off? Do you want him on your fantasy rosters? I'll say yes. With some of the inconsistency from some of these guys and with bye weeks coming up, I think Andy Dalton is worth having. I don't think he's going to put up the huge numbers that he did on Sunday. That was a nice coming out party. I think they'll rely on the run game most weeks, and they don't play the Raiders every week. But I like Andy Dalton. I'm jumping on the bandwagon, no doubt about it.
Streamable quarterback. You notice how Canales revitalized Baker Mayfield's career last year, and I think that Dalton could continue to look really good throughout this season.
All right, let me throw out some other quarterbacks. You tell me on or off. Daniel Jones, Bo Nix, Aaron Rodgers. All these guys had very nice weeks. Daniel Jones, back-to-back weeks over 22 points, 0 interceptions. Aaron Rodgers was lighting it up the other night. What was that, Thursday night? And then Bo Nix running the ball and throwing. And Cortland Sutton had a nice game. So who's bandwagon are you jumping on?
Off Daniel Jones. Bo Nix, I think if Sean Payton can sort of unlock the game plan for how to use him best as a quarterback, he could be kind of a serviceable, weekly kind of plug-in guy. And then I think Aaron Rodgers, you're starting to see little signs of the Jets figuring it out on offense. And if he stays healthy, I think that he could be very good. So he's the one that I am the most trying to catch that bandwagon and jump on it before it leaves the station.
I'm intrigued by Bo Nix a little bit. I am. I'm leaning toward jumping on his bandwagon. Right.
He looks good this week.
With Rodgers and the Jets, they got to run the ball. Brees Hall, I think as the season goes on, I think they got to lean on him a little bit more versus, hey, Rodgers light it up every week. All right, some receivers to talk about. Are you jumping on or off their bandwagon? Amari Cooper finally wakes up. Monster day for the Browns. Rome Odunze, his breakout game as a rookie. And then Calvin Austin III. Some people may say, who is that? Steelers wide receiver. He had over 20 points this week, 4 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown. I am on his bandwagon. I'm on Rome Odunze's bandwagon. And there is no way I'm jumping on a Browns bandwagon. I am off the Browns. No Browns on my team. No, thank you. So what about for you?
Yeah, Amari Cooper will be a good wide receiver consistently when Deshaun Watson gets benched, which is coming. But you might have missed your chance to buy low on him. He was dropped in one of my leagues, and I picked him up this week and feel pretty good about that. Rome Odunze, I just don't think you know what's going to happen when all three of their receivers are healthy. I think Odunze is a really good real-life receiver, but when Keenan Allen comes back, if DJ Moore keeps getting sort of upset about his lack of targets, every week it's going to be kind of Russian roulette which one of these guys is going to get the most targets. And I just don't know if you can start him in fantasy with confidence, even though I think he'll be a great NFL receiver. Calvin Austin, why not, man? The Steelers need somebody else to be a receiver on that team. And so, yeah, he's a guy you want to have on your bench and see what happens there. I'll say tentatively I'm on that one.
Yeah, I'd jump on that waiver wire bandwagon with him. Speaking of the Bears, absolutely. I'm jumping on the Roschon Johnson bandwagon because, all right, he's been running back 33. He's averaging just over 10 points per game. Swift is only averaging 6.5 points. There's no loyalty to Swift. They bring him in this year, and we've seen him in and out of lineups over the last couple of years, injuries, all that kind of thing. Roschon Johnson, second-year guy. I think I'm buying in. I'm jumping on that bandwagon. And then I think I mentioned him earlier, Jalen Tolbert with Dallas. Yeah. I think he's worth taking a look at, picking him up on waivers. All right, we'll have a little more fun as we wrap things up today. We'll talk more waiver wire. Be sure to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Harrison Zuckerberg writes his weekly Is He Legit column, talking about certain guys, whether or not you want to pick them up on waivers or keep them or drop them. He talks about Sam Darnold, Emmanuel Wilson, Trey Tucker, Darnell Mooney, and Cole Kmet. So get his thoughts there. And then we love to play a little game here where we ask, who is that? And we talk about guys that scored touchdowns or had surprising performances from the previous week. So let's take a look at week 3. And I will begin with Nick Vanette.
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you going to tell me who that is?
All right, he plays for the Titans. 2 catches, 9 yards, and a touchdown. There he is. I don't think I'm going to jump on the bandwagon, but that's Nick Vanette. How about last night, Monday Night Football, Ty Johnson?
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you going to tell me who that is?
He's like, I guess they're third down running back, but James Cook is unbelievable, but the game was out of hand. Ty Johnson, 15 fantasy points, 3 rushes, 18 yards, 3 catches, 28 yards, and a touchdown. I don't think you need him on your team. I don't think you need him on your fantasy roster, but nice performance from Ty Johnson. And then I'm watching why was I watching the Titans game? But I saw this guy, Josh Wiley.
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you going to tell me who that is?
He had 4 receptions and 43 yards. It kept going to him. Will Levis barely completed any passes, but Josh Wiley kept catching passes. And then, we mentioned earlier, Sam Laporta banged up. Well, if he's out of the game, Brock Wright comes in.
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you going to tell me who that is?
4 receptions, 34 yards. Somebody to keep an eye on if Laporta does miss time. So he's worth picking up. I think he's worth considering. I would say if you have Laporta, you put him in your IR spot. If he's inactive, if he happens to be inactive, or hopefully he plays through the ankle injury, we'll see. Then you just go pick up Brock Wright. But as far as a standalone guy, maybe not. All right, and then we got to go to the Vikings, the 3-0 Vikings. Johnny Munt.
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you going to tell me who that is?
All right, 1 catch, 1 touchdown, 2-yard touchdown for Johnny Munt. I don't think we need to pick him up. No thanks. And then the last one. This is the who is that of the weekend. And it happened last night. Offensive tackle Trent Scott.
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you going to tell me who that is?
He got into the end zone. I mean, what in the world? Jaden Daniels throws his first NFL touchdown to offensive lineman Trent Scott. I don't even think you can pick him up. But you know what's funny? In my ESPN league, there's a defensive tackle that has running back or tight end eligibility. I can't think of his name, but I'm waiting for I've wanted to just pick him up just to mess with my league. But I wonder if Trent Scott will get that eligibility. I don't know.
Eligibility. Is it Sion? What's the Sion Vaki or whatever his name is that's a defensive and offensive player and for the Lions. But
is that who it is? I added him to my watch list. Just I didn't do it this week, but I will one week just to mess with people. But anyway, there you go. So as far as waiver wire goes, yeah, I think Roschon Johnson's my guy this week. That's who I'm targeting. And then I'm looking at quarterbacks. Who's on the waiver wire and looking ahead for bye weeks. Those are my 2 biggest things. And then if you haven't picked up Emmanuel Wilson, what are you doing? I've been talking about him. You should have already had him. But I got him in a couple of leagues, so I'm excited about him. But if he is still available, go get him. And then, we did talk about this. Bucky Irving.
Bucky, yes.
He's rising.
That's a good one.
We've talked about him on this show. I'm out on Rashad White and Bucky Irving. He's going to get more and more volume moving forward. So get excited about that. Any final thoughts, Trip?
Yep. No, I'm with you on all those, man. It's just a good reminder to go check out kind of your waiver wire for some of these injured players, IR players who might have been dropped. You mentioned Johnny Mundt. Go see if somebody got worried and let go of TJ Hawkinson or something like that, especially if you're in one of these leagues with no IR slot. Those guys get dropped all the time, and they're going to be coming back soon if they started the season on IR. So great guys to go out and just look for.
Yes, that a great reminder because, yes, once the buys hit, people start dropping players from their bench because they need guys actually in their starting lineups. And so some of those players, you end up snagging them, and then you can have them later in the season if you've, developed your bench well enough to where you can have that flexibility. So, all right, guys, enjoyed it. Thanks to Aaron, to Trip. Fun show as always. Week 3 done. We got an intriguing Thursday night matchup, Cowboys-Giants. Who would have thought? So curious to see, do the Cowboys bounce back? Do the Giants keep the momentum going? Was it truly just because they played against the Browns? I'll lean toward that, but we shall see. But for these guys, I'm Bryce. I'm a sports fan and a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans who follow Jesus together. The encouragement today, don't be stubborn.